Governments like to boast about getting more police on our streets. This is not what they mean. 30,000 off-duty officers marching against this government's plans for reform. And at last week's Federation conference, claiming the relationship the service has with its ultimate boss is broken.
We no longer trust you in the police service. Full stop, end of story.
The government's argument is that the police are the last long unreformed public service. Its pay and conditions were last reviewed 30 years ago. Some of its roles can be done cheaper by civilians.
So let's stop pretending the police are being picked on. Every part of the public sector is having to take its share of the pain.
We have a medic, please!
The police say their unique job, the sacrifice of a right to strike, of being effectively on call 24/7 to put themselves in harm's way, means they should be treated differently.
There is a feeling amongst the police that these people just don't respect them, that there is a lack of understanding of their job, and I think that has created a real problem for this government that previous governments didn't face.
Last year saw 2 reports into pay and conditions that have been viewed with suspicion by many officers. The author insists the work was independent, fair, unpolitical and much misunderstood.
And that is disappointing because there are, for the hard-working officers doing the most difficult, demanding jobs, working shifts, out there in the cold and the wet, facing dangerous and angry men, in many cases, those police officers, if my recommendations are implemented, are actually getting a pay rise. Unfortunately, many tens of thousands of officers have got convinced that this is all bad, it's all part of a pay cut for political, ideological reasons, and that could not be further from the truth.
Most serving officers I've spoken to privately accept some reform is inevitable and necessary. But the privatisation of certain roles has left them deeply uneasy, and on paying conditions, they resent facing a future where they may make the calculation that the job gets more out of them than they do out of the job. And that message is coming to Westminster's front line.
I've had a significant number of police officers come to my surgeries. They're broadly in agreement with a number of the reforms, but they also feel that it's all happening too fast, and uncertainty and anxiety is not good.
Why the PM is so keen to reform the police may lie in the past. In 1993, Home Secretary Michael Howard backed away from similar reforms. At his side, a young David Cameron.
I'm joined now by the Minister responsible for the police, Nick Herbert, and the Chairman of the Police Federation in England and Wales, Paul McKeever. Gentlemen, welcome. Paul McKeever, let me come to you first. Paul McKeever, I'll come to you first. We're about to go through some fundamental changes that will alter policing forever. That's what you said. Why are you afraid of reform?
Well, we're not at all. And in fact, we're the first organisation, I think, to call for a Royal Commission many years ago. But it has to be holistic reform. It doesn't have to be this piecemeal reform we're going through at the moment. And we also, to start off, we were the only organisation, I think I know, in the public sector that said we accepted we should take our fair share of the cuts. And we listened to Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, Sir Dennis O'Connor, who said you could cut the police service by up to 12% and then you're down to the bone. And we accepted that. That's still above education, 8%, NHS, which is ring-fenced.
Piecemeal and you're cutting onto the bone.
No, that's not true, and actually the savings have been identified by the Independent Inspectorate of Constabulary, and on top of that, things like the 2-year wage freeze will actually save further sums of money, so the numbers do add up. And that, of course, is something that's applying across the public sector. And what I think would be wrong is to say, here are difficult pension changes that have to be made because people are living longer. Here are changes that have to be made to deal with the fact that we have a deficit, but somehow the police should play no part in that. And I'm afraid the Police Federation has been an organisation that has consistently opposed reform whenever it has been proposed. So you were an organisation that opposed the introduction of police community support officers. Actually, they're very popular with the public.
But this is going way beyond anything
You are
like
actually an organisation that opposed the introduction of traffic wardens.
Let's deal with that point.
If you actually look at what's happening is we've got a four-year pay freeze in the public sector, like everybody else, we accept that, and there are reforms to pensions as well, which we have no negotiating rights on at all. But uniquely in the public sector, we have this Windsor review that's now been adopted by government, which has 121 recommendations which fundamentally change policing. Why do they fundamentally change policing? It opens the door to whole-scale privatisation of the police service. You lose accountability, you lose the resilience. So we needed to get 16,000 officers on the streets last year. That's the number we're losing over the next few years from the front line. Listen to some of the officers who were at the Federation conference last week, and they're saying in Devon and Cornwall, for example, 700 officers have gone already. It's putting the community at risk.
You're cutting police numbers. Who would have thought a Conservative-led government?
But the Windsor Review says nothing about police privatisation at all.
Well, it's attacking the officer
It says nothing about that. It says that there should be a basic standard of fitness in the police, which I'm astonished that the Police Federation should oppose. That just makes sense. And it's dealing with the fact that when we came to power, we discovered that there were 25,000 police officers who weren't on the front line at all. 1 in 5 of police officers were not actually doing frontline jobs. And what the report, an independent report advised by a senior chief constable, says is that actually it's important that we have a system of remuneration that makes sure that you prioritise the front line, that pays people for the job they're doing, and that if they're not fit enough or they're not doing jobs which are
why are you trying to hide the fact that it is opening the door to privatisation?
We should be having a pay system that recognises that.
But why are you trying to veil from the public that there's wholesale privatisation going on? That even the core of British policing, the bedrock of British policing, the Office of Constable is being fundamentally changed here. People trust that Office of Constable, and they understand it. They understand the independent role that police officers play.
If you go on
and you're changing that.
If you go on making these outlandish claims, then I don't think you're actually going to make any progress at all. There's no change to the Office of Constable.
Tell me,
no
Minister.
Introduction. Just Paul. There's no change to the powers that police officers have to make arrests, and you know that. And actually, the use of the private sector in policing was introduced by the last government and is up to chief constables.
But this is going way beyond that.
The fact is that you continue to make claims that just won't stand up to evidence. You said that 40,000 police officers.
Tell me why in the tender document. Tell me why in the tender document for the West Midlands and Surrey Police that it actually talks about patrolling. Why is it mentioned in the tender document? You say that you don't want that to go to the private sector, and it is mentioned in the tender document. And you're
made absolutely clear. There's no intention of doing that. And in fact, of course, they wouldn't have the powers because we're not going to give them. So it's a complete red herring.
And when we talk about fairness, you talk about fairness in government. David Cameron talked about fairness, and yet some officers are going to be losing 25 to 30% of their spending power. Well, why is that? Why are we being treated differently to other parts of the public sector? Why are we having pay reviews on top of extra in our pension and extra on top of the four-year pay freeze?
Let me answer, Paul. It's important to realise that these Windsor reforms don't actually change the overall pay bill. What they're saying is we should have a system that recognises those officers that are doing the most important jobs according to the skills that they have, instead of the system we have at the moment, which is that you simply increase your pay every year regardless of actually the skills you have. You have an automatic system of progression.
Isn't it true, Paul McKeever, that even after these reforms are implemented, even if they're implemented in full, the police will still have one of the best deals on pay and pensions in the public sector?
You have to look at the job we do. I mean,
but is that true? We know the job you do.
It's completely true.
Yes, it is. We are reasonably well remunerated for what we do.
And you say so.
And we say so as well. And we were open to reform. But what we're astonished at is that government has given policing such a low priority. And we're getting the knock-on effect from other areas of the public sector being hit as well, like the social services, like education, where we're having to pick up the pieces from there. And we're having extra work to be done. And public safety is being put at risk. And that is the bottom line. You have given us a very low priority indeed, and it's unfair.
No, that's not true. And police officers will continue to earn 15% more than other emergency services. I think that's right. They'll continue to have the best public sector pensions available. I think that's right. They'll continue to be able to earn overtime.
Why have you cut us by 20%?
£2,500 a year. All of those things will continue to be available.
But why are you cutting? You may be able to deploy police more efficiently. You hope you can, but you are cutting the numbers. I mean, the police peaked at 143,000 under the last government. I think you're already back to 136,000 with more to come. People will be worried that you're cutting the numbers.
The question is what happens at the front line. And of course we have to make savings. No one's been in any doubt about that.
Listen to what people are saying
on the front line. All of the political parties admit that they would have to make savings and the numbers would go down. But the fact is that we have, for instance, a situation where we have 6,000 officers on restricted duties. That number has doubled in the last 8 years. I've already said we had 25,000 officers who are not on the front.
Final
It's that
point,
kind of
Andrew.
thing that needs to be reformed.
The final point that needs to be made is the government knows it's been caught out here. It's given policing a very low priority, a 20% cut.
Not
Overseas development's been increased by 34%. That's a larger budget than policing. Why are you putting British public safety
There isn't
at
a
risk?
force in the country that is going to have a 20% cut to its budget. That's simply not true.
Well, that's right, because inflation, it's going to be higher.
We're going to have to leave it there. Just that
Thank you,
story in the
Andrew.
Sunday Times today about taking over from ASBOs, is that true?
That we're going to replace the system of ASBOs with a better system which actually will enable a more effective approach that will enable injunctions to be obtained earlier to prevent crime and deal with reoffending more effectively. It'll be better tools for the police to fight crime.
Right.
Sadly, things like that are being lost because of what's going on elsewhere.
They're still going. It's approaching 12:30. You're watching the Sunday Politics.